Dre all day.
Now tuned in to the best show there is. This is the one where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve is yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves anyone out there to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. We put all this together. What you get is the mindset, the method, the philosophy, the show, and the book known as Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. Today's topic is how to make your life worth reading about. How to live a life that is worthy of you writing a book about it or somebody else writing a book about it. And then on top of just writing the book, because that's not the final step, somebody actually wanted to read the damn book. A lot of these days, a lot of people want to write a book, or maybe I just have a disproportionate perspective on this simply because I've written several books. So people who want to write books tend to let me know about it. So maybe people want to write books, they don't tell you, or maybe the people who want to write books don't talk to people who don't write them. But since I do write them, people who do want to write books tell me that they want to write a book. So it seems like a lot of people. Some people want to write a book for maybe they feel like it's a credibility piece to just be able to say, hey, I am an author, or hey, look at this book, or I wrote fill in the blank, whatever the name of their book is. Some people want to use their book as leverage for their business. Maybe it's a combination of credibility and leverage for their business. Some people say you write a book as quote unquote a business card. And some people still do that, I guess. Some people want to write a book for their ego, just so they can be able to say, and all of these could kind of go into the same umbrella. They can just say, I'm an author, or they can walk into a room and slap their book on the table and say, look, I wrote this book. It has my name on it. It has my picture in the back. Some people want to write a book because they feel like they have a very interesting experience. I've heard people say this. I hear people say this all the time. I'm going to write a book about fill in the blank because it's something that maybe they've experienced many times, something that they feel like they know a lot about, something that they feel very strongly about. I hear people say that sometimes just when they get to an emotional peak on a situation. I'm going to write a book about this situation right here. Some people want to write a book for all of these reasons: credibility, leverage, ego, interesting experiences. They think they know things that a lot of people need to know about. Maybe they just think they know a lot and they just want to talk about it and make sure everybody knows that they know. Some people want to write a book for none of these reasons. Regardless of your reasons, today I'm going to tell you how to live a book-worthy life. In other words, when I say book-worthy, I'm not necessarily talking about you getting into the publishing world and actually sitting down and writing a book. If that's not something that you're that interested in, or you don't really read books yourself, you should read books, as I've talked about in several episodes. But what I mean by a book-worthy life, what I mean is a life that somebody else will want to look at and say, damn, that's interesting. I wonder what I can learn from this person. That's what I mean. Live the type of life that somebody who maybe has never heard of you, does not know you personally, and has never met you, once they hear about you, what you're doing, what you've done, the type of person that you are, the impact that you had on other people, situations, places, and things, that they would say, whatever it is that caused that person to be who they are and how they are, I want to know about it. That's what I mean. If you want to live that kind of life where somebody just wants to know about you and how you became you, then follow what I'm going to tell you here today. Point number one, the topic again, how to live a life that is worth reading about. Number one, do something or some things, plural, that most other people cannot do. I mean, now that's a simple enough concept to understand, but depending on who you are, your experience in life, and how you see yourself in the mirror, most importantly, it may not be so easy for you to figure out. Doing something or some things that other people can't do. This right here is the meat of your book. Any of you read my book, Work on Your Game, using the pro athlete mindset to dominate your life and business, dominate your game in business, sports, and life? The angle that I'm coming from in that book is an angle that there are very few can say they did the same thing. I started out not really getting a lot of attention playing my sport. A lot of people have that. So I was in a big pond with that as my experience. But then I moved on to, then I actually, quote, made it, close quote, in basketball. There are a lot of people who did that too. So I was still in a pretty large pond. Then at the same time, I started building my brand online through what we weren't even calling social media at that time. Now I'm in a much smaller pond because there aren't too many people who did it at that exact time, that exact way. And then I got out of basketball, leveraged that into building my own business, being an entrepreneur. Now I was in a pool of, at that point, I was pretty much in a bathtub. It was just me. So it doesn't have to be just one thing that you did. I couldn't just say, hey, I played basketball, so let me write a book about it. There's a billion people who could do that, or even pro basketball or college basketball, or started out as a nobody and became a somebody in basketball, or use social media, or am an entrepreneur. None of those would have separated me from millions, maybe billions of other people. But when I put them all together, now I have something that nobody else can say me too. You need to figure out what you have done, what you are doing, or what combinations of things you have done or are doing that you can connect together some way, connecting the dots of those things like I just did for you right there, talking about myself. This becomes the meat of your story, or the meat of your book. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily that it has to be your personal experience. It doesn't have to be, because we're talking about a life worth reading about. In other words, there needs to be some distance between your experience and that of your readers. So your personal experience doesn't just have to be, all right, I'm doing these specific things. And let me explain that in a different way. The distance between you, the experience that you have and that of your readers means they're going to read the book because they want to close the gap. So if your book is all about things that you've done and there are a whole bunch of other people who have done the same thing, then why would I want to read that? Why would I want to hear that story? Why would I be interested in that person? I probably wouldn't be, because everything you're talking about, I've done. All right, so there's no interesting angle to that for me. You have to have there has to be some space between where you're at and where they're at. And understand that your audience is often the people who are sitting in the seat that you used to sit in. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be older than them, or even that you have to have been doing something longer than them. It's just that you've done something that they haven't done. I could read a book of somebody who's 10 years younger than me because they have certain experiences that I don't have, maybe that I don't even want to have, but I'll happily read about it. I'll happily listen about it. I'll hear about it. I'll watch it and see, hey, that's interesting. I'm not trying to do that, but it's interesting enough for me to pay attention to. So it doesn't have to be somebody that is younger than you if you happen to be young or younger, whatever you consider young. It's just someone would look at what you've done and say, that's interesting. I want to know about it. I want to know how they came about that. So there are people who are older than me who have read my book and found it interesting, even though they're not trying to play basketball. They're not trying to build a brand. They're not trying to utilize social media. They're not trying to write a book. They're not trying to have a podcast. They're not trying to do any of the things that I did, but the story is interesting enough that they want to at least devote a little bit of their resources to learning how it all came about. You understand that? That's what I mean by having a life worth reading about. If people have done everything you've done, they don't need your story. So you need to figure out, how can I separate what I've done myself from anyone else who may be in my same space, or what about my story would be interesting to who? These are questions that you need to figure out. What about my story? That's a blank you need to fill in. Will be interesting to who? Who is the audience that would actually want to read this, hear this, watch this, listen to this, etc., etc. You use this as your compass. This is where every single day when you're going to work, every day when you're getting on that computer, every day when you're walking onto that field or that track or that court or getting in that pool, you're asking yourself, if you're thinking about this, when this is fresh on your mind, having that life worth reading about, what is it that I'm going to have done? What will I have accomplished that if I was to stand in front of a room of people, random people, chosen at random, that I don't know, and I said, these are the things that I've done, what would make me interesting? What would separate me from everybody else in the room? Is there anything? If there's not anything, then you don't have a book quite yet. But that doesn't mean that you can't get one. But you need to start thinking, how is my experience going to separate me from everybody else who might be out there? When you do have something, some angle that you can press on that separates you from anyone else out there, or at least the majority of people out there, now you have something, maybe, if you follow the rest of these steps here. So let's get into that point number 2. Today's topic is how to live a life that is worth reading about. Second thing you got to do, you got to have a perspective that is not aligned with the consensus. Allow me to repeat and then I'll explain. Have a perspective that is not aligned with the consensus, meaning you have to have some angle, some opinion, some way that you come at your topic or whatever you say or whatever you're talking about, whatever you're doing, that is not what most people believe, that is not what most people think, that is not what most people agree with. And then hopefully you got some foundation underneath that to explain why you think the way that you think. So then at that point, even if people don't agree with your perspective, they can at least understand it and respect the fact that you at least have some solid reasons why you think what you think. For example, in my book, The Super You, which is subtitled Unlocking and Living with Your Highest Level of Confidence. And in one of my TED Talks, and actually in an episode of this show, even episode 769, the topic was too much confidence is not your problem. I tell people, don't try to keep your confidence under control. Don't try to keep your confidence under a lid. Don't try to find the right balance of confidence. Take your confidence as high as it could possibly go, to the point that some people will be uncomfortable with it, even that people will call you derogatory names because they feel like your confidence is a little bit out of control, calling you arrogant, cocky. I want you to aim to be that. That's what I tell people. And some people will push back against that. Actually, a lot of people will push back against that. But at the same time, as soon as I get done saying that, in the next paragraph, I'm going to explain why I say that. So I'm not just saying it and then just leaving it there, because then people could poke holes all through it and there's really no foundation to it. But when I explain it and explain why I'm saying it and the background on it and how I've come to believe that this is a better way of dealing with confidence, then people can say, look, I still don't agree with you, Dre, but I understand why you're saying what you're saying, so I can respect it. That's having some substance to your opinion. So having an opinion is one thing, but you got to have some substance behind it, something that can back up your opinion, especially when you have an opinion that goes against the grain. When your opinion goes against the grain, you need something behind it, because people will attack it, and you need something that you can push back against, or you need some stability to it, so when people push against it, it doesn't fall apart, right? It has to be a stable, stationary wall. So your perspective that is not aligned with consensus. In other words, what I mean is, have a perspective that is anything but boring or commonplace. Do not have a boring perspective. The biggest challenge that I see with the majority of people who are brand building, book writing, podcast producing, blog publishing, whatever, YouTube creating, is that they're just boring. Like, there's nothing interesting about your perspectives, nothing interesting about your delivery, nothing interesting about your presentation. There's nothing, you're straight down the line. You are bland, you're commonplace. Everything you're saying, everybody already agrees with. How you present yourself is nothing interesting about it. Nothing about you that is, you got to be remarkable these days, because we are in the attention economy, ladies and gentlemen. We've been in it for several years now. So if you didn't know, you better wake up. The attention economy means the number one thing you need to get from an audience is their attention first. Then you get everything else. The money comes after the attention. You don't have people's attention, you can't get their money unless you're running a credit card scam or something. Have an opinion or a perspective, or both, or a presentation or an idea, or all of these, if you can, that is anything but boring and anything but commonplace. In episode number 400, I told you to stop asking for opinions and start giving them out. In episode number 703, I told you, if you want to have authority, you got to have your own opinion. Maybe you have been through something in life in which you're not the only person who's gone through that thing. As I already explained to you, I wasn't the only person to not make my sports team in high school. I wasn't the only person to walk on in college. I wasn't the only person to play overseas. I wasn't the only person to start a business. Not the only person to publish a YouTube video. I'm not the only person to do any of those things. So what about your experience will make it interesting? What made mine interesting is that I combined all of them together and I connected the dots. This one led to this, led to this, led to this, led to this. Yours doesn't have to be the same way, but you need to figure out, since you're probably not the only person in the world to ever do what you've done, even a combination of things maybe, what makes it interesting? What makes yours proprietary to where the only way people can get that angle is they got to go through you? So let me tell you how you can figure this out. I'm going to give you the answer to the question, okay? And I'm going to give it to you on point number 3. Today's topic, once again, is how to live a life that is worth reading about. The third thing you have to do to answer this question, what makes your experience unique from everybody else, even if you've done the same thing, even if a million other people have done the same thing that you're doing, make mistakes. Yes, you heard that correctly. Make mistakes. What this means, if your whole life had been smooth sailing, everything you tried worked, every idea you had just popped off, every business you started just went straight to $1 billion in a month or a year or 10 years. If everything you tried has been successful, every phone call you made, somebody answered. Every proposal you proposed, somebody accepted. Every time you sent an email, somebody replied. Every time you fill in the blank, you got the positive result, that would be boring. Nobody would be interested in that story. Why? Because nobody can relate to that. Every single one of us has made mistakes. Every single one of us has failed. Every one of us has had a great idea that we thought was going to be perfect, and then we executed it, and none of that shit worked. Do you agree? Anybody disagree with that? Anybody here had everything you ever tried just worked? Every great idea you had just popped off perfect? Of course not. So the mistakes, the setbacks, the failures, those are what make stories interesting. Everybody here has been to the movies or watched a movie on Netflix. What makes it interesting? It's not just all the positive parts. What makes the positive ending great is the fact that there was some part during that movie where you might have believed that it wasn't going to work out. That's what makes it good. This is the interesting part of your story. And the great thing about mistakes and failures and setbacks is usually they are very proprietary. Usually you're the only one who's had these exact failures, exact mistakes, exact setbacks. Me, again, going through my story, didn't make my high school team, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. Not because I was trying to not make it. I was trying to make it. Not making it is what made the story interesting when I finally did make it. And then I made it, which is great. This great success. And then I sat the bench that whole year. Another setback. Then I had to walk on in college. Wasn't even sure I was going to make the team. Made it. Got recruited to a school. Great thing. So 2 successes in a row. Then the coach who recruited me got fired. Another setback. Then a new coach who came in kicked me off the team. Another setback. Didn't play my senior year of college at a D3 school. I'm talking about I'm going to go overseas. Now it looks like it's over. But then I was able to get on overseas. Another success. So you see how this up and down. And then there was more and more that came after that. And more that I'm sure are going to come in the future. Successes, failures, setbacks, more angles, more wrinkles to the story. But all of it makes it interesting. Your failures are usually very proprietary. Your successes, not all the time. I mean, most of us like to tout our successes. We will broadcast the things that we succeed at. We don't broadcast our failures, but the failures are actually what make the story interesting. So there, I just gave you another nugget right there that you can use to make your story worth listening to and worth reading about. The interesting part of the story, ladies and gentlemen, is when something or someone fucks up. That's the interesting part. The interesting part of your story is not when you won. When you won the trophy and everybody was cheering for you, is not the interesting part of your story. When you wrote a book and it sold 10 million copies in the first month and you hit the New York Times list, is not the interesting part of your story. When you tried out for the team the first day as a 9th grader and you made the team, became a starter and averaged 30 points a game, that is not the interesting part of your story. Why? Because most people cannot relate to that. The interesting part of your story is the part where you thought everything was going great and then everything fell apart. Why? Because everybody can relate to that. The thing is, most people can not relate to, however, everything falling apart and then getting back up and making it work later on. Most people, when things fall apart, when they fuck up, when they face setbacks, usually they just stay right down there and they don't get back up. So the fact that you got back up, that's what makes it interesting. When you get back up and then you actually get to the goal, that's what makes it interesting, because most people know about half of that story. They don't know the other half. They know what it feels like to fall down. A lot of people know what it feels like to fall. That's what we want to know about. The part where you fell down, but you got up and then you kept going. You don't have to make mistakes on purpose because they'll happen naturally. All right. I think everyone here knows that. Any of you ever made a mistake on purpose? Maybe a few, maybe every now and then. I don't know. You were trying something, experimenting, but most of your mistakes, setbacks, failures, and fuck ups, you weren't trying to have them be those. They just happen that way, right? They will happen naturally. Why? Because you're human. And if you're ambitious and you're trying things that are outside of your current range of abilities, or at least until you do them, you probably won't be perfect at it the first time around. So listen, these mistakes will happen naturally. All you gotta do is have a good memory, take notes, and remember the things that you've gone through. So when it's time to tell your story, you can remember what happened. You can tell everybody about it. If you are out there and you are active, mistakes will happen. If you are not making mistakes, go back and listen to yesterday's episode. Get up off your ass and go do stuff. Because if you're out there doing stuff, I guarantee the mistakes will happen. Point number 4. Today's topic is how to live a life that is worth reading about. Be an interesting person. I talked about this in the open of the episode. A lot of people out there you want to get out there. You want to put your stuff out there, whether it be some content, a product or a service, a book, a podcast, just your name, your face, your image, whatever it is, your message, whatever you're trying to get out there. So a lot of people are just not interesting. They're boring. There's just nothing compelling about them. Compelling means to draw people in. There's nothing about them that draws people in. You need to figure out what about you draws people in and then leverage that thing and keep doing it, and you'll just keep drawing more people in. And then when you get a core audience of people who are drawn in, give them what you need to give them so you can get what you need to get. But you got to find the interesting angle about you. What is it? There may only be one. There may be 1,000, but you need to figure out what it is. You need to figure out at least one of them. Not many people want to read a book about a boring person. Actually, a boring person would never even think about writing a book. If you are not interesting to talk to, or interesting to watch, or interesting to listen to, All right, why would anybody want to read you? That's even worse. All right, it's much easier to have a conversation or watch a video or listen to a podcast than it is to read a book. Reading a book takes concentration. It takes effort, it takes focus. I can't do a whole lot of other things while I'm reading a book. So if I'm going to read a book, it better be damn interesting. It better be something interesting about the author or the topic or the story that I know that ahead of time before I start reading the book. If I'm going to read a book, I don't know about you, but I think you would agree. So if you are not interesting, listen, I'm not even thinking about your book or your podcast or your video. If you're not an interesting person, forget about it. So what makes someone an interesting person? It's a good question. Well, first answer to that question is all of the above. Everything that we talked about here today. All of those make you interesting. The fact that you've been through failures, the fact that you've been through setbacks, the fact that you have an opinion that does not agree with everybody else's opinion, all these things make you interesting. As long as you have some substance behind these things. Yes, I fucked up. I did this. I fell off the wagon. I broke my leg. I was trying out for this team. I was on drugs. I tried this thing. It didn't work. I made this product. Nobody bought it. All of those are setbacks, but do you have some substance behind it? In other words, did you turn it into a success? You can have a whole bunch of radical opinions that go against the grain of what everybody else thinks. You can have 1,000 of those. Do you have any substance behind any of them? Those is what make you interesting as a person. Here's the other thing that can make you interesting. Ask yourself this question. This is a shortcut to figuring out what makes you interesting, all right? Ask yourself about the interesting people that you know. Who are the most interesting people that you know, that you deal with on a day-to-day basis? Who are they? Name them. Write them down. Write those names down. Go through your phone and write them down on a fresh document. Then ask yourself, when you have all those names written down, all the interesting people you know, what is it about these people that make them interesting? And just write it down. Under each name, write down everything about that person that makes that person interesting. And then after you write that down for every single interesting person you know, you might have a list of 100 qualities, right? Of all these different people. And I'm sure there'll be some that they have in common. But write down all this list of all the interesting people you know, and then what qualities they have, and then go through that list and circle each one that also applies to you. All right, now you know what makes you interesting. And now all you got to do is put those traits on Front Street and keep doing that over and over and over again. Front Street, in case y'all didn't understand that slang, that means put it out in front of you so that that's the first thing people notice about you. And then just keep doing it. Lather, rinse, repeat. And that just happens to be the title of an episode early in the show. I believe that was in the first 200 episodes. And then you're a gang group member listening to this, you know where to access that. Let's recap today's topic, which is how to make your life worth reading about. A lot of people want to write a book for many reasons. Some people for no reasons that I've thought of, but they want to write one anyway. Regardless of your reasons, today's topic is how to live a life that is story worthy, that people will actually want to hear that story or know that story, even if they never met you before. Number one, do something or some things that most other people don't do. This is the meat of your life story. There needs to be some distance between your experience and the experience of your readers. That's the gap that the book is filling. If everyone who's reading you has already done everything that you've done, listen, they won't be reading you. They would never pick up your book in the first place. So you had to be out there doing something that most people will never experience in the first place. Use that as your compass. Number two, have a perspective that is not aligned with the consensus, that goes against the grain. In other words, have an opinion or a perspective that is anything but boring and has some substance behind it. So when it's challenged, because it will be challenged and you will be asked to explain it, you have some substance behind it that makes sense. What about your experience makes it interesting? That's the question you got to answer. Point number three, make mistakes. What that means is if your whole life was smooth sailing, it wouldn't be interesting. All right, the interesting part of every story is when something or someone fucks up. All right, if there are no fuck ups in the story, then it's not a story. When things turn bad for the hero, that's the part we want to know about. You don't have to make mistakes on purpose. If you're out there being active and doing things, the mistakes will happen naturally. You don't even have to try. Point number four, be an interesting person. Nobody wants to read a book about a boring individual. So if you're not interesting to talk to or watch or listen to, I damn sure I'm not going to take any time to read you. So people need to see and hear things in an interaction with you that makes you interesting enough for them to want to know something else. So you're listening to this episode right now. You're like, all right, you're evaluating unconsciously. Do you want to hear anything else from this guy that you're listening to right now? If the answer is no, you won't listen to the next episode. But if it is, then you'll keep going. But you need to figure out what about you makes you interesting, and all of the above can help you. And the second question is just ask yourself, hey, who do I know that's interesting? Write down all of their traits and do that about every interesting person you know, and then figure out which traits apply to you. And then start pushing those traits out there in front of you as your your brand image, if that's what you're doing or that's the way you want to sell yourself, and keep doing it until you find an angle that the people, whoever they are, your people happen to be, whatever they're responding to. Work on your game. Dre, all